Welcome to Universal Basic Calcia, guys. I'm Evan. Hi, Mike.
How you doing, Evan?
Great. Hi, Amir.
No.
Hello. How's everybody doing?
All right, all
Well,
right.
so lots of news today. I almost bet this morning on Pam Bondi getting fired. I didn't pull
Oh,
the trigger.
that's not-
Um, I did think she was overwhelmingly likely to be the next person fired. And actually, when I looked, the price was 50 cents or something like that. But I was actively building a position that we're going to discuss later today. And so I didn't pull the trigger. Although Trump pulled the trigger.
That's true. I wasn't really
Typical.
paying attention to this specific market, but do you know what the main points of contention were between Trump and Bondi?
Sure. It's no secret about this. It's over handling of the Epstein files. And I think, I don't know if you saw Bondi's congressional testimony.
Yeah, the Dow is
All
now
right, so
50.
there's some funny unforced errors. She has notes, so she had some zingers, including one against Jamie Raskin, so that she'd pre-written. Um, you know, like when Sarah Palin asked Joe Biden if she could call him Joe, just so she could say "It ain't so, Joe." 20 minutes later in the debate, Bondi refused to address the Epstein victims at the hearing, which I thought was shocking. And then there's been a lot of issues over perceived failures to disclose the documents. And of course, there's no way to know for sure how responsive the Department of Justice has been. I may surprise both of you. Won't surprise you that I have looked at the Epstein files and I searched a lot of names. But it might surprise you that I actually would say something in defense of the administration as a lawyer. Like when you're a young lawyer, actually coding documents for privilege and redacting documents is a big part of what a young litigator does. It's a very difficult job. It's very easy to miss things. And there are many, many redactions in the millions of documents. So it is easy for me to imagine that they made an honest mistake. So I have a litany of grievances against Pam Bondi, including, blatant failure to follow the rule of law. But that wouldn't have been at the top of my list. But the Times said he was actively considering firing her, and I think he probably perceives it as a way to get some distance from the Epstein, debacle. But I didn't bet.
Well, Kalshi, you now have an opportunity to kind of make some money on this because Kalshi already released the market on who the next attorney general is going to be. And I think Lee Zeldin is leading that currently.
So did he appoint Todd Blanche as the temporary interim replacement? I believe that's what I read. So Blanche is a former U.S. attorney, and actually, prior to representing Trump, was a reasonable voice. Zeldin has zealously led the campaign's assault against environmental regulations and would likely be at least as great a disaster as Bondi. Anyway, all right. So this is a good entree into our principal topic for today, which is basically looking ahead to the midterm elections, whether or not what we think the prognosis is for the Republican Party and for Trump, and how you would bet on that, presuming you had a theory of the case. I do happen to have a theory of the case here. I know you do, Mike. Amira, actually not 100% on yours. Looking forward to hearing it. And they may be slightly different. So let me just throw it open to both of you first for a second. Where are you on Trump's stock? So do you think like it's at its floor? Do you think it's likely to go lower, or do you think it's likely to rebound before the midterms? And then we could discuss how you'd bet on that. So, Mike, where's your head at on this?
I think Trump is in about as bad a position, and the Republicans are about in as bad a position as they can possibly be right now. I think that the stock across markets pertaining to Trump and the Republicans is depressed about as far as it can go. And I look at it through the lens of three main factors. So first of all, you have the Iran war, wildly unpopular war. A lot of people have already argued that Trump hasn't quite justified the reason for the war, and we're sort of in a limbo there. I think that's definitely depressing the stock. Also, the shutdown has not ended, right? There's still ambiguity about when it will end. It seems to be that it's moving toward a direction where it's going to end soon, but we don't know, right? Because these things go through peaks and troughs. And finally, the economy is quite bad now. Prices are rising for consumers, and you'll recall that one of the main messages of the Trump administration going in was that they were going to address the affordability crisis, and that hasn't manifested. So I think Americans are outraged on a number of fronts right now. I could see the stock going up if the Iran war and the DHS shutdown resolve, because presumably that would lead to less pressure on prices for gas and increase affordability across the board as well.
Okay, so you've said two things. Let me just push on one. So one is how Trump's approval rating got as low as it got, and I think that's a cogent explanation for it. But just to be clear, you don't really think it can go much lower than it is right now. Is that correct?
That's correct. For most markets, I would say it's not going to move more than 3 cents lower for Republicans.
Okay. Amir, agree or disagree?
I disagree with that. I think there's plenty of room, downwards from here, because a lot of the effects that we're talking about with the Iran war, with inflation, haven't actually manifested as much as they can yet. I mean, sure, the Strait of Hormuz has been closed for about a month now, yet these oil tankers, there are lags and delays for the oil tankers, for the cargo ships that carry our products, and then also for things like fertilizer, right, which will affect our agriculture later on. Usually you see about a 3 to 4 month lag. And now Trump is actually verbatim going out and saying that the EU and our Western partners and Europe should go get their own oil. And that you see in, Asia as well. He's actually said that to Japan and Korea as well. And those are our major trading partners, right? We have a lot of imports and exports that go out of there, and a lot of trade that happens. So this can pretty much get significantly worse in the next couple of weeks,
Okay.
economically speaking.
Let me just ask you this before we get into thinking about these as betting propositions. So Trump's aggregate approval rating in the amalgamator that Kalshi uses is around 40%. There are some individual polls that have him in the mid 30s. We're going to talk about the difference between individual polls and amalgamated polls a little bit later. Let me just give you sort of a realistic worst case scenario and ask you what this does to Trump's approval rating. It's possible to imagine that the price of gas goes, let's say, to $200 a barrel, $200 a barrel of oil. So the price of gas goes to, I don't know, $7 or $8 a gallon. I think that's certainly plausible. There's a lag, as you pointed out. Now, some of the other lagging effects that you mentioned, Amir, fertilizer, agriculture, you're going to see even greater lag there, right? Because there would be growing time required before you would perceive the absence of the crop abundance that we're used to. Okay, but let's say that there's inflation, high gas prices. Let's say the war in Iran continues, lags on. Say we're 3 months from now. Let's even say that there's additional evidence that some Epstein files have been withheld. And let's say, I'm going to try to be realistic here. I would be surprised if there's anything in the Epstein files that would link Trump to an actual sexual encounter. But let's say there's something that shows that Trump's level of knowledge is a little greater than was understood. Now, that's somewhat difficult to imagine because Trump clearly knew and has said this. But let me just pause there. That's about the most horrible I could imagine it going for them. Where do you think his aggregate approval rating would go if that happened? So Amir, since you're a little more, think there's a little more downward movement, what do you think the floor actually is?
As a percentage?
Mm-hmm.
I think it could easily go down to 20%.
Okay.
I mean, he's vastly unpopular as a president.
Okay. I'm going to say that's wrong. You could say it, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, I disagree with Amir. I thought you pointed out and pushed back well, but I think 20 is a little low. But then again, Evan, you sort of spelled out a nightmare scenario here. So if gas is actually at $8 and
Right.
inflation is rampant and the Iran war is accelerating as opposed to decelerating, Amir may be correct, but I just, I don't see that sort of trifecta coming to be.
Okay, so I actually think that trifecta could happen. I think there's a far greater chance that those three things happen than there is that Trump's approval rating goes down to 20%. And let me just pause to say why, and it informs. It's the biggest bet I've ever made, the second biggest bet I've ever made in Kalshi, and I'll tell you why in a second. There are almost no polling propositions that divide 2080. So the lowest approval rating that any president has ever recorded in the history of Gallup polling is Nixon during Watergate, and it was 33%, right? So he was forced to resign. Trump, I can't imagine anything worse than January 6th. And Trump's low water mark there was 34%. I think, and you could listen, I think it's very valuable to have this conversation because, I think, you're a very smart young person, and I think you represent a large share of the types of people who bet in this market. So I will say that I am betting, and I'm betting against your reasoning, right? That is my theory of the case. Now, I think I'm going to persuade you that I'm right and you're not going to bet against me. But look, what do you think would happen if Donald Trump invited Hillary Clinton to the White House tomorrow and shot her in the face? What do you think would happen to his approval rating?
I'm actually more optimistic that I don't think it would go down to 20%.
I think it would go down.
Optimistic.
It would go down,
Which
but
way
not
is
to 20%.
optimistic?
No, optimistic relative to my previous 20% statement.
Okay, yeah. Mike, how far would it go down?
If you're saying under the specific scenario of Trump shooting Hillary in the face, it could go down to 20% or sub 20%. I mean, the problem I have with the Nixon comparison is that Nixon occupied an entirely different historical epoch. You're talking about symbolic and institutional factors. But I mean, if there's a nightmare scenario where Americans can't afford gas, they can't get to work, there's ongoing war in the Middle East, and inflation is rampant, I don't care how much you feel attached to or an affinity with Republicans and Trump. If you can't eat and you can't commute to work, then your approval for those people is going to fall if you perceive them as the ones in charge.
Okay, well, so we're really it's kind of a mathematical disagreement. So I agree that it could drop. Now, I think one thing that people put out of their mind naturally is what the narrative would be. So if Trump did shoot Hillary Clinton in the face, he's not going to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I had a temper tantrum." He's going to say she was a traitor. And I rid the world of, a pedophile who kept, children in the basement of a pizza store that doesn't have a basement. I think it's fair to say that Nixon's from a different era, but human nature is human nature. And I think Trump's core support of approximately 33%, that there basically is nothing that would shake them of that view. And
what if a low-heeled nuclear warhead goes off in New York? I mean, you still think that his...
Well, here's the good news. I'm not going to care whether I win or lose my bets if that happens.
Well, yeah, naturally. But still, the question remains.
One thing you said, Evan, real quick. You said January 6th was, you perceive that as the worst thing that could happen for the Trump administration.
What I would say, just to be clear, I believe that is the worst thing that has happened so far. That is the most egregious violation of democratic norms that Trump is engaged in.
Right.
And yet, I think his base...
It could be worse.
No. I'm not going to dispute the merits of that at all. I think it's the perception of his base, and even maybe independents that slightly lean towards MAGA. They didn't have that exact same connection. They actually, were sympathetic to Trump's arguments that, I didn't want this to happen, and that, a lot of these individuals are just the crazies, and the majority of MAGA doesn't stand behind this or something along those lines. In my opinion, and this is just a more like social view of things, a bird's eye view of things, the Iran war, inflation, all these kinds of things are worse within the MAGA coalition. So you're actually seeing independents that were on Trump's side, distance themselves, people like Tulsi Gabbard, people like RFK Jr. And you're actually seeing even the core of MAGA starting to say, why are we doing this again? Which is one of the first times that they've actually questioned what Trump is doing legitimately and out loud, right? So you have Tucker Carlson, who's now completely detached himself from Trump. And he was one of the main advocates of these January 6th rioters. Same thing with Megyn Kelly, right? He's actually made more enemies from people who were never Trumpers, people like Mark Levin, people like Ben Shapiro, than he has with his former base.
I think it's a fair point. So I think the Iran war is a breach of Trump's implicit compact with MAGA supporters, right? I think one of Trump's core principles was America first, no engagement in foreign wars, or no engagement in, nation building, or, exporting democracy. Okay, so he's breached that. I agree with that. And I just don't believe that it's going to get him below 33%. And I just want to stick another thought in your head, which is it is very, very hard for human beings to admit that they're wrong.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Okay. Because I don't know if I haven't, I don't know if I ever told you the story privately. I haven't told it here. I was at a baseball game in 2015, and this guy said to me that Trump was going to win. Okay. And just to show you that I'm the same person now that I was then, I said, Sam, I'll bet you $10,000. Okay. And he was right. And I would talk to a lot of people then. And, look, they had a theory of what Trump was going to be. It was not mine, but I thought it was defensible. I thought it was reasonable. Nobody can have that position today. And so they're just engaging in an elaborate cognitive, it's just too much cognitive dissonance to think, look, I voted for somebody who's just anti-democratic and upending the entire world order in the course of a year. So I just think that third, I don't know exactly what story they're going to tell themselves or what they're going to tell about Democrats. Mike, I mean, in the scenarios you described, they're just going to blame Democrats.
Mm.
And truth is irrelevant to this discussion. I'm just making my belief about human psychology.
The only thing I would push back on a little bit, and that's why Amir's perspective is very, very valuable in these conversations. I think people on the left can presume that there's a lot more homogeneity on the right than actually, in fact, exists. About half the country or half the voting country voted for Trump. I mean, before the Trump era, these people weren't, I want to use the word delusional, but I don't want to offset our viewers. I think people, as Amir pointed out, they're starting to defect on the basis of the Iran war. And if economic conditions sour significantly, I think people are going to be concerned more with their pocketbook than they are with resolving, or rather not resolve, or maintaining cognitive dissonance.
Okay. Let's talk bets. So, Mike, you've alluded to this before. You have a position on the Republicans maintaining control of the House.
I do, yes. I bought it about 15 cents. At last check, it's 14.4 cents. I could see this price falling maybe 2 or 3 cents more, but I just think that Republicans are so compressed right now that I don't know. I mean, sure, if there's a nightmare scenario, it could fall more, but I just think I don't see the confluence of factors that you kind of laid out that would necessitate that price moving lower.
Well, when the way you framed that, you said it could fall more. So in this case, we're talking about the perception that Republicans would maintain control of the House could fall more. Is that what you mean there?
Yeah.
Okay, as opposed to the actual likelihood. All right, let me just throw some historical perspective onto this. First of all, parties in power lose in the midterms 90% of the time. I think there are only two counterexamples. I think it's Clinton's second term post-impeachment. And when the presidents have approval ratings below 50%, they lose an average of approximately 35 House seats. So historically, and this would be, this is just kind of the typical arc of history, which now I'm reaching a point where I've lived through more of than I care to admit, but it's just very standard for there to be massive retrenchment during the midterm elections.
Right. That's a great point. Yeah.
So I would say it feels to me, I mean, if I had, okay, and I'll bet on anything, as we know. I mean, I would certainly bet that the Democrats are going to control the House. And it actually would have felt to me priced approximately right. So how do you get yourself to a place where the Republicans maintain control of the House? So first, you do have some gerrymandering, which has happened, which gives the Republicans a little bit more of a structural advantage than they had, certainly during, the 24 election. So to materially change kind of the blanket Democrat, Republican, thumbs up, thumbs down approval vote in the House, the generic ballot, as it's referred to, the war has to end.
The shutdown also has to end.
The shutdown, the shutdown's going to end, so that's likely.
And
the economy has,
I was going to say, would you say the gas prices would have to fall back down again?
Right. So you need the economy to sort of be normal. Now, I think you would also need some moderation of immigration policy. So I think the ICE violence that's pretty clearly unpopular, even with some of his core supporters, certainly among his independent supporters.
Right. I think, it kind of goes to your point, Evan, that Democrats are likely to control the House.
So I wouldn't want to, your bet. So I always distinguish between buy and hold and, buying based on perception, which you like to do much more than I do. I wouldn't think of your bet as a buy and hold bet.
Definitely not a buy and hold bet.
It's okay. So you're effectively betting on the war to end, the economy to stabilize. Trump has, I actually think replacing Kristi Noem has been helpful. It does seem like there's some more normalcy in ICE's approach.
Yeah.
I could see that happening, but it doesn't feel to me like that would be perceived as getting up to much higher than 25%. Right. Though you'd nearly double your money if that were the case.
And the point that was good about what you were saying is the DHS shutdown, if it ends, or rather, I'm sorry, if ICE reforms, right? I'm kind of hesitant to think that people are going to even perceive the reforms as an improvement as long as it maintains its basic shape. If you got like a few concessions, like some of the set concessions that Democrats are demanding, I don't know that it would really bode well for the Republicans. I think like the opposition to ICE at this point is so deeply entrenched that mild concessions are not going to move it.
But that sounds like you're arguing against yourself.
I am. That's why I said it's a credit to your point. Yeah.
Okay. All right, Amir, are you going to buy the Republicans to maintain control of the House at 15 cents?
I don't think so. No.
Yeah. It's a pass for me. It's a pass for me.
I would have to really pay. Yeah, I would have to really pay attention to it and then sell at exactly the right time. But I wouldn't know when that right time is.
Right. I mean,
right.
My bet is predicated on the idea that the Iran war is going to end relatively soon and that the government's going to reopen. I think if those two things happen, the price moves up slightly. I'm not looking to double my money, but I could see a 25% return on my money if those things happen.
So I actually agree with that. I think the one unrealistic thing, in my opinion at least, is so Iran war ending, sure. Government shutdown ending, absolutely. Everything like gas prices, the economy returning to normalcy, I just don't see that happening anytime soon because the long-term ramifications of exactly the Iran war are going to be seen, like I said, 3 to maybe a year, 3 months to a year from now. And,
So
I just don't see fuel prices going back down. It looks like the Iranians are now going to control the Strait of Hormuz and have cargo ships essentially pay a toll of $2 million when they want to pass by. So these are long term effects.
it's an interesting point. I think, I think firing Pam Bondi and Kristi Noem are steps in this direction. I think Trump is going to be moderately more conventional running up to the midterms. I don't think he wants to live through the Democrats controlling the House, and he certainly doesn't want to live through the Democrats controlling the House and the Senate. Right? If the Democrats control the House, he very well could be impeached again.
Right.
And he doesn't seem to like that experience, having had it twice. Now, but I think Amir makes a good point. I actually be surprised if the war is prolonged, much beyond a month or something like that. I think he's just going to declare his objective achieved. Now, what's controllable? He could release a massive amount of the strategic petroleum reserve, which would suppress gas prices. But what Amir said, it's a little more difficult. I actually, you know what? I've evolved my thinking. I'm not going to be in on this, but I don't think you're going to lose. I don't think the perception of the Republicans' chance is going to fall much below 15 cents. And I do think there's some possibility that it'll uptick. But I wouldn't stay in on this past the summer, I think.
That's totally
Okay.
fair, Evan. Yeah, I mean, if you're thinking about it in terms of the timeline, even if I had to sell at a mild loss in the summer, I might.
Mm.
But it's interesting, it's always to me what the bet is really about. I don't think your bet is really about the Republicans winning the House. I think
Certainly
your
not.
bet is about Trump effectively becoming a more conventional president with an eye to the midterms, and there being some perception that lifts up congressional balance.
Yeah.
All right, Amir, you're in on the popular vote in the House election, right?
Yeah, and essentially, yeah, and just to give a brief background about the popular vote, the Cauchy market essentially tracks a national House popular vote margin. It's like a national scoreboard, essentially, if the Democrats or Republicans are being favored. This time around, obviously, Democrats are being strongly favored to win the popular vote, and it's like I said, a proxy for national sentiment all across the United States. And the margins are currently shaped by a few different baselines. So in 2024 the Republicans won the House by popular vote only by 3 points to point out. And then in 2025, you had a bunch of different things happening. You had Doge firings, you had the tariffs, you had Medicaid cuts, and that all increased favorability towards the Democrats. You also now have the government shutdown and obvious economic unease. This is further pushing about 4 to 6 points towards the Democrat favorability. And now Quinnipiac polls have Democrats up about 8 points as well, and some even up to 11. And independents strongly opposed to what Trump is currently doing. I believe about 26% of independents currently support what Trump is doing in the Middle East. So in the likely outcomes category in this market, you're going to see anywhere from 4 to 8 points, which are consistent with the current averages. The high end of this market is anywhere from 9 to 12 points for the Democrats. And then the low end is anywhere from 1 to 3 points for the Democrats. Now, I do have a quick thing to plug in here, and it's that the fact that Democrats have been actually flipping House seats in state legislatures. And actually, I didn't know that this was the number. I had to recheck. Anywhere from 25 to 30 seats, at the high end being 30 so far between 2025 and 2026, which I think is a really, really high number. And I don't think these polls are taking that into account currently.
Yeah, so far, right, historically, Trump has outperformed his polling numbers, but we've seen a reversal of that since the 24 election, that Democrats have actually been outperforming. So, my gut says that that's mostly priced into the market, with the Democratic sort of expected margin being pretty high. But if I had to lean one way, I would lean that it'll go more blue than it'll go red.
I think it's an
But
interesting indicator that you pointed out, Amir, and you're probably right that most people, probably the vast majority of people who are betting on this market haven't yet considered that some of these local races are turning up for Democrats. So it's a good point.
Yeah.
all
And
right.
you saw a lot of this happen in 2018 as well. I mean, in the midterm elections, then it was a lot of young voter turnout that really shaped things and shaped things against Trump. And I think that is just going to be, compounded this time around because it's going to be young voter turnout plus the independents who currently oppose what Trump is doing.
All right, let me put out there, if I may, two bets that I've made, and you can try to disavow me of them and our listeners. So there's a gross difference between the Democrats' likelihood of regaining control of the House and their regaining control of the Senate. And the chance of the Democrats regaining control of the Senate is trading at basically a 50-50 proposition. To my mind, it's nowhere near a 50-50 proposition. And that's because of, the structural advantages that Republicans have in these races. So the Republicans have a 53-47 advantage in the Senate. The Democrats would have to flip 4 seats for that to happen. It is very, very difficult to imagine happening. So they would have to win the open seat in Michigan, hold the open seat in Michigan, hold John Ossoff's seat in Georgia, where he's running a little bit down right now. And then they'd have to flip 2 seats, North Carolina and Maine. And then they still need more than that. So
Right.
they'd have to win Texas or something like that. And I mean, the Democrats could win the generic ballot by 8 points and not win control of the
course.
Senate.
Right. Yeah, the generic
Right.
ballot is just a general sort of ambient perception. Doesn't
Right.
come down to the specifics of each election, right?
So 20 of the 22 Republican seats that are currently up for re-election, of the 35 in the market, 20 are in states that Trump won by more than 10 points. And I just want to add another point on this. Okay, Susan Collins is a great example. Susan Collins has been a very resilient senator and somewhat, moderate, independent-minded senator, whatever. She convinced herself to vote for the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh, but whatever. We'll give her credit for being independent-minded.
Sure.
Susan Collins will run better than Trump. So just because the Republican generic ballot is -8 or even -10, that doesn't mean that Susan Collins wins. And, in Texas, I think the outcome of the Paxton-Cornyn primary really, really matters. So could
So
Talerico beat Paxton? Maybe. Could he beat Cornyn? I think
I don't think
that's a
so.
heavy lift. You don't think so
Right.
either?
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, if he goes against Paxton, because Paxton's sort of to the right more, I think he could win. But yeah, I'm with you.
But my main point is a mathematical one here.
Yes.
Is that so we've talked about independence of propositions before, but I don't think the Senate seats are independent propositions. I don't think the Senate seats are linked propositions. I think they're somewhat independent propositions. In other words, Republicans' stock could be terrible. They could just run terribly, but I could still imagine Susan Collins winning, and I could, still imagine John Cornyn holding on to his seat. I don't think they're inextricably linked to Trump. And so to me, in order for this to happen, you'd effectively need 6 somewhat independent events to resolve in the Democrats' favor. And even if I give you a 50% chance of each of those things happening,
It's a compound
okay, well, now
probability
it's
problem.
it's 0.5 to the 6th power, so it's 1 out of 64. So I mean, okay, I just, even if I turn that into a 70% proposition, it's still not getting you anywhere near 50%. Now, I mean, would I bet my immortal soul that the Democrats are going to, that the Republicans are maintain control of the Senate? I wouldn't. And
Sure.
I mean, I'm, I hope they gain control of the Senate, but this one just does not make any sense as a 50-50 proposition to me.
I'm with you. I mean, I'd be curious of two things. So first of all, what do you think is the fair price? And second of all, what do you think's driving the split right now? I mean, the sort of idea that this is a 50-50 proposition.
So great question. And here's why it's the question that I want the answer to. So this one I'm prepared to sink. I've bet, and I'm prepared to bet a lot more.
Mhm.
So part of why I like doing this is Amir said to me before, or when Amir said earlier, I think it's going to go to 20%. I'm like, oh, moo-hoo-hoo, I have a competitive advantage against people who believe that. And that's why I'm betting. I mean, I say this all the time. I'm not there to gamble. I'm there to invest. I'm investing that my knowledge of statistics of large populations is better than yours. Or you understand what I'm saying? Not,
Right.
I want you to thrive, Amir. But that reasoning, I feel more comfortable making a bet where I know why I believe what I believe, and I know why somebody else believes what they believe. And I'm not sure how this market is getting up to 50%. It's hard for me to imagine that people are just reflexively dumping money in it. I don't quite get it.
I think you may be underestimating the extent to which people will reflexively dump money into this. I don't think people are going into like, sort of the minutia of different Senate races and then trying to build a model about the overall Senate probabilities. Just don't think it's happening. I mean, if I had to guess, and this is more of an intuition and we're both kind of struggling to understand, I would say like 80% of the market is not doing that kind of deep level work.
Well, that is the question. And it is really, I mean, I think it's kind of the central question of this podcast. Because I think if you're right, then there's enormous value in doing what we're doing. And I have seen many times where I've gotten prices on things that I just can't imagine. And I've also seen sometimes I've made a bet and I was like, oh, somebody else understood this better than I did, which is the worst feeling in the world. Yeah, I'm not getting this one.
Where would you put the fair price for Democrats to win the Senate? Or maybe a range. I don't want to hold you to one price point.
Sure. Honestly,
Sure.
2%.
Oh, you think Republicans to retain the Senate is or rather for the Republicans to win is 2%?
No, 98%.
Oh,
the chance of the Republicans retaining control of the Senate, I think, is 98%. I mean, I could work myself down to 95. I could work myself down to 90. I can't work myself to 50-50. I just don't see it.
All right. I mean, I haven't probably looked into it as much as you have. It's 98% strikes me as high. I was thinking more around 70, but okay.
Well, even if you think the Democrats have a 30% chance of winning it, it's still, you have a lot of value there. But I don't see it. I don't think those 6 races that I described to you are actually 50-50 propositions. And I don't think there are a lot of like wild cards out there, like they pull out Nebraska or something like that.
Right.
I just don't really see it. All right, let me throw out one other one too. Okay, so this one I've spent a lot of time looking at. Talk to my friend Claude about it some.
Claude's a great guy.
Yeah, we like Claude.
Yeah.
So there's a market on how low, there's a market on how high Trump's approval rate can go and how low Trump's what the floor is. And so there are some floors of 33, 34, 35% that are very, very hard for him to get through. So now let me just point out here, because I think this is what's really important, is this is linked to a voting amalgamator called VoteHub. And different amalgamators amalgamate polls differently. Okay. Let me, you guys know this, but let me just make this point just in case folks this isn't intuitive. There's a tremendous difference between the possible outcomes on an individual poll versus an average of polls. So when people say the polling result that's within the margin of error. Newscasters get this wrong all the time. Okay, so if Donald Trump has an approval rating of 40% with a margin of error of 3.2%, what that is effectively saying is that there's a 95% chance that the true approval rating of Trump in the overall population is between 40 minus 3.2 or 36.8 and 43.2. Okay. The larger the sample, the narrower the margin of error. And now, so when you're sampling 500 people or 1,000 people, you can get a pretty high margin of error. So if you said to me, what is the chance that Donald Trump gets an approval rating of 33% in an individual poll? Okay, that could happen. That could happen if oil goes over $200 a barrel. But in an average of averages, okay, Trump basically hasn't gone below 40% in this. And people forget these polls include like Rasmussen, a notoriously Republican-leaning pollster, which is actually a high-quality pollster. And so long as you understand what the choices that pollsters are making, Rasmussen data is very valuable because it's internally consistent. So it gives you useful longitudinal data. But for Trump to fall from 40.2% or 40.4%, which is where he was when I looked before we started the podcast, to 33%, you're talking a series of hundreds of polls that drop him. And it's a weighted average, weighted with a recency bias, weighting more recent poll results more, but all results within the past year or whatever is still factored in. It would be very, very difficult for his polling average to go below 33%. And you can, right now, it's trading at, 70% likelihood or 30% likelihood that it falls below it. And it's just, to my mind, and this isn't even about what I try to do with this, is I just redact Trump. And it's just, what's the chance that this metric falls further? I mean, to me, it's way sub 5% chance. So that one I have bet with impunity.
What do you think, Amir?
But I agree. I think at the end of the day, we were talking about before how Trump at this point might not even care about the Republican Party or about perceptions of himself. It is his last term after all. But I still do think that he cares. I mean, there's ample evidence of him, manipulating the markets, on a Friday or on a Sunday before Monday, essentially, just so that, he has a week of time to renegotiate things with Iran or something like that. So I do think he cares about his public perception. That's the angle that I'm kind of banking on with this argument, that he will care about his approval ratings going into the midterms.
Oh, but that makes my case even stronger.
Absolutely.
Yes,
yeah.
I mean, actually, if I had a bet, I've already said it. I think he's going to moderate himself. I mean, I think even that guy, there's something in there. There's something competitive in there. I would be really, really surprised if he's like, you know what? We're going to bomb them back to the Stone Age because that's what they belong in. We're going to take out Lebanon while we're at it. I just don't think he's going to go that way. I think he's getting enormous pushback. So I actually think some of the things that you both described that would lift his approval rating are more likely to happen. All I'm saying is, and I like when I have a lot of independent things that need to go wrong and I can still win, that's when I feel good about a bet. So he could prolong this conflict for 3 months. Gas could go to $200 a gallon. He could, have a video of him, in bed with, I don't know, Jeffrey Epstein's niece or whatever. And I still think I still don't think his polling average goes below 33% because I've got cognitive dissonance on my side. I just think it's going to be too hard for people to say, I was wrong. The guy's a schmuck, despite the overwhelming, irrefutable evidence, abundant, a cornucopia of evidence that has been laid bare to the American public that this person cares about no one other than himself. And so my small silver lining is that I'm going to make a tiny profit over this. No, I'm going to make a medium-sized profit over this.
Yeah, I think that the compression that's happened so far to his approval rating has sort of been slightly downhill. There's been a series of factors. You know, I mean, some people can support the Iran war. Some people can support DHS funding. Nobody's going to support $8 at the tank. Nobody's going to support double food prices. I can see if people's material condition degrades in a kind of nightmare scenario that you've laid out. Again, I just don't think that. I don't think the
Yeah,
cognitive dissonance is going to be
I
as
just think
controlling.
you reframed the question. So you said nobody's going to support $8 a gallon. So I think if you said, "Oh, do you support the price of gas?" that could get 20%. And if you said, "Do you support Donald Trump's handling of the energy situation?" that could get very low. But on the core question of whether they're going to approve of him, because there are going to be counter narratives, this is never going to exist in a
I
vacuum.
understand that.
So he's going to say the war is being prolonged because Democrats aren't funding the war adequately. And he's going to say, that prices are suppressed, that gas prices are elevated. He's just going to say Biden. There doesn't have to be any connection to reality. That's just what he's going to say. So I don't doubt that there's somewhere lower for it to go. But since there has never been a poll in the history of polling that recorded a president at lower than a 33% approval rating, I'm going to bet that he doesn't get enough sub 33%, which would be the historical worst, that it brings him down below that. Now, I could be wrong. I mean, he could, you like black swan events, the price of oil could go to $500 a gallon. And I don't know, France and England and Canada could declare war on us. And he says no. And meanwhile, he calls Hillary Clinton to the White House and shoots her in the face while, she's displaying a picture of him on Jeffrey Epstein's island. I mean, sure. And that's why, again, I'm not wagering my soul on this. I'm just going to bet some money, but I am going to put a fair amount of my Kalshi investment on this because I think this is as good as I can get. And that's my thought process through it. Even what you're saying, it doesn't worry me about whether his rolling polling average approval rating is going to go below 33%.
So, your idea basically is that 33% of the population is essentially fundamentally detached from reality, and absent some kind of nightmare scenario, they're just going to remain detached from reality.
It's even more extreme than that.
Okay. Tell me.
I'm just going to modify the last part of what you said. Is 33% of the population is detached from reality, and in a nightmare scenario would continue to be detached from reality.
Got it.
Okay. I believe, do you ever see the Chappelle Show skit where it's like, what would it take you to believe that something's happening? I think Trump could be, beheading children while, displaying pictures from Jeffrey Epstein's island. I just don't think it's going to matter. I understand that there are more extreme scenarios than we've lived through, but we've lived through really, really extreme scenarios.
It's quite bad, yes.
We've had, a dozen credible cases of rape or sexual assault. It's just not budging it. We've had him foment violence, and I just think people are just going to see it differently. I don't think you're going to see it. I think you're going to see it the way I'm going to see it. I don't think Amir is detached from reality, but I think we could bring 50 million people or so on this podcast, and they just wouldn't credit it. But yeah, I think literally what you said is exactly what I'm betting on. That I still live in reality, and I think they don't. And I have some friends in my Facebook feed, and actually, Amir, you could tell me this, but like I see what they say, and I'm like, oh my God, how could you possibly believe that?
It's a lot of copium out there now injected.
What does copium mean?
Copium, they're just coping, and therefore copium is the drug that they're consuming to cope.
Right.
It's become a really popular thing now. So like any MAGA, like strong Trump supporter who's still like grasping at straws to defend his actions right now, anybody on X or on Instagram will just be like, had enough copium yet? And it's getting to a point where really it's just like people are embarrassing themselves, like you said.
Well,
Hey, you know
that's
what
for
I got?
true. Yeah.
Mike, you know what I got to say to both of you?
Yeah.
You know what? And if I'm wrong and his approval rating plummets to 20% and I lose all my bet, I'll be the happiest money I've ever lost in my life.
I
And
know.
that is a great offsetting benefit to this. And actually, it's going to be very, very little consolation for me that I get some money if the Republicans win the Senate. So I'm just going to have to bet more so that it's a big consolation.
Yes, I got you.
All right. We'll be back. We're going to try to spend some time talking about the risk of fixing, insider trading among the administration, both in real life and on Kalshi, and how you can navigate that as an investor. I think, for example, we'll talk about this when we turn to it, that one nice thing about that bet, the polling bet, is it is not susceptible to any type of corruption, which is part of why I want to do it. Okay, Mike, how can everybody reach us if they want to ask us a question, which we'll be happy to answer on the air?
Yeah, you're welcome to email admin@ubkguys.com, or you can follow our Facebook, Instagram, or X, formerly known as Twitter. Please, if you can, like and subscribe. It really, really helps us out.
Amir, what else can people do to help support the podcast?
Absolutely. Follow us on Instagram. Make sure that all of your notifications are on, and that goes for YouTube as well. When we release a new episode, you'll be the first to know.
All right, everyone. We'll see you soon. Be well. Be well, Michael. Be well, Amir.
Thanks, folks. Be well.
Universal Basic Kalshi Guys was created and is hosted by Michael Horahan and Evan Mandery. Our producer is Amir Rasulov. Our theme song is Passing Trains by Nathan Eklund. You can follow us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Instagram at UBK Guys, or email us at admin@ubkguys.com. The content on Universal Basic Kalshi Guys is for informational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute trading, financial, or investment advice. Nothing discussed on this show should be construed as a recommendation to buy or sell contracts on any prediction market. Trading on prediction markets involves real financial risk, and you could lose money. Always do your own research and consider your own financial situation before trading. The hosts may and often do hold positions in markets discussed on the show. Views expressed by guests are their own and do not reflect the positions of the show or its hosts. If you or someone you know is struggling with problem gambling, free and confidential help is available 24/7 through the National Problem Gambling Helpline at 1-800-522-4700 or visit ncpgambling.org.